I'm standing here on the western shore of Maui, watching the sun begin its slow descent toward the horizon, and I can already feel the tensions of the world melting away from my shoulders. The air is warm but not oppressive, carrying with it the scent of plumeria blossoms and salt water. And there's something about this particular stretch of coastline that seems to exist outside of normal time. I've traveled to many places seeking peace and tranquility, but there's something uniquely restorative about this island, about this moment, about the way the light plays across the water as evening approaches. Let me take you on a journey through my experience here, sharing everything I've discovered about finding true rest and rejuvenation on this magical island. I want you to feel as though you're walking beside me, breathing in the same ocean air, hearing the same gentle rhythm of waves that has lulled so many travelers into the deepest, most restorative sleep they've experienced in years. My journey to this moment began months ago when I realized I hadn't truly rested in what felt like years. Sleep had become something I chased rather than something that came naturally, and I found myself lying awake night after night, my mind refusing to quiet down. A friend suggested I needed to completely change my environment, to find a place so inherently peaceful that my body would have no choice but to surrender to rest. That's when Maui entered my consciousness, not as a vacation destination, but as a healing space. I arrived at Kahului Airport in the early afternoon, and the moment I stepped off the plane, I felt the humid embrace of tropical air wrapping around me like a warm blanket. There's something about island air that's different from anywhere else. A thickness to it that feels substantial, almost nourishing. I collected my bags and picked up my rental car, a simple sedan that would be my companion for the next 2 weeks as I explored the island's quietest corners. My first destination was the western coast, specifically the area around Kihei and Wailea, where I'd rented a small cottage just steps from the beach. The drive from the airport took me through changing landscapes that felt like traveling through multiple worlds. The Central Valley was dusty and brown, with sugarcane fields stretching toward distant mountains. Then gradually the landscape became greener, more lush, until finally I caught my first glimpse of the ocean, stretching endlessly toward the horizon. The cottage I'd rented was perfect for my purposes. A single-room structure with large windows that opened completely, allowing the sound of the ocean to flow through unimpeded. The owner had decorated simply with light fabrics in whites and pale blues, driftwood accents, and nothing that would distract from the natural beauty visible through every window. The bed faced directly toward the ocean, positioned so that I could lie down and see nothing but water and sky. That first evening, I did nothing but sit on the small lanai and watch the sunset. I'd arrived too late to explore, too tired from traveling to do anything but be present with my surroundings. The sun moved toward the water with what seemed like deliberate slowness, painting the sky in shades I didn't have names for. There was the obvious orange and pink, but also purples so deep they were almost black, yellows that seemed to glow from within, and a particular shade of blue-green that appeared only for a moment as the sun touched the horizon. The waves were gentle that evening, rolling onto the shore with a rhythm that felt almost like breathing. I noticed that I'd synchronized my own breath with them without consciously deciding to do so. Inhale as a wave swelled and rose. Exhale as it collapsed onto the sand with a soft, rushing sound. This went on for what might have been minutes or might have been an hour. Time felt different here, less rigid, more fluid like the water itself. As darkness fell completely, I went inside and lay down on the bed without bothering to close the windows or draw any curtains. The sound of the ocean filled the room, and I could still see stars through the window above the bed. I don't remember falling asleep that night. One moment I was consciously aware of lying there listening to the waves, and the next moment I was waking to soft dawn light, having slept more deeply than I had in months. Over the following days, I established a rhythm that felt less like a schedule and more like a natural flow. I would wake with the sunrise, make simple coffee in the cottage's small kitchen, and take it down to the beach to watch the morning light transform the ocean. The early morning water was often glassy and calm, reflecting the sky so perfectly that it was difficult to tell where one ended and the other began. I discovered that Maui has many beaches, each with its own character and energy. Some are dramatic with powerful waves and rugged lava rocks, while others are gentle and protected, perfect for simply wading and floating. For my purposes, seeking the most peaceful environment for rest and sleep, I gravitated toward the calmer beaches, places where the water whispered rather than roared. Wailea Beach became one of my favorite spots during the day. The beach curves in a gentle crescent, protected by the natural geography so that the waves arrive, already gentled by their journey around the point. I would arrive in mid-morning after the sunrise walkers had departed, but before the hotel guests descended for their day at the beach. During this quiet window, I often had long stretches of sand entirely to myself. I brought very little with me on these beach visits. A towel, water, sunscreen, and a wide-brimmed hat. I purposely left behind books, phones, music, anything that would occupy my mind with input from outside. Instead, I practiced simply being present with the environment. I would lie on my towel and watch the clouds move across the sky, noticing how their shadows changed the color of the water below them. I observed the shorebirds running along the water's edge, their quick movements somehow perfectly timed with the rhythm of the waves. The sound of the ocean became my constant companion and teacher. I began to notice subtleties I'd missed before. The waves didn't arrive in a monotonous pattern, but in sets, with periods of larger waves followed by calmer intervals. I learned to recognize the sound of a wave building offshore, the slight change in the background noise that signaled a larger set was coming. I noticed how the sound changed depending on the sand's slope and consistency, how it was different at high tide versus low tide, how wind affected the wave patterns and therefore the sounds they made. I started taking afternoon naps on the beach, something I'd never done before in my adult life. There was something about the combination of warm sun, ocean sounds, and a slight breeze that made sleep feel inevitable rather than elusive. I would lie on my towel under the shade of a palm tree and drift off without effort, waking 30 or 40 minutes later feeling genuinely refreshed rather than groggy as I often did from naps at home. One afternoon, I met an elderly local man who was sitting on a beach chair near where I'd spread my towel. He introduced himself as Keoki and explained that he'd been coming to this exact spot on the beach every afternoon for the past 30 years, ever since he retired. We talked for a while about the island, about changes he'd seen over the decades, about what brought tourists here versus what kept residents here. He told me something that shifted my entire understanding of what I was experiencing. He said that ancient Hawaiians understood that different locations held different kinds of mana, or spiritual energy. Some places were powerful and dramatic, appropriate for ceremonies and important decisions. Other places were gentle and restorative, meant for healing and rest. This coastline, he explained, had always been known as a healing place, somewhere people came to restore balance after illness or loss or exhaustion. Listening to Keoki, I realized I'd intuitively sought out exactly what I needed, without knowing the history or cultural context. The island itself had offered me what I was seeking, and all I needed to do was accept the gift by being present and open to it. This conversation changed how I experienced the remaining days of my stay, adding a sense of intentionality and gratitude to what had already felt special. I began exploring different beaches, specifically to understand their individual characters. Makina Beach, also called Big Beach, was more dramatic with larger waves and a wilder feeling. The sound of the ocean there was powerful, almost thunderous when larger sets rolled in. I found this energizing during the day, but not conducive to the gentle relaxation I sought in the evenings. Instead, I preferred watching the sunset from Keoki Beach, where the waves were moderate and the beach orientation provided stunning views of both the sunset and the West Maui Mountains. The sunsets became a kind of meditation practice for me. Rather than photographing them or simply glancing at them while doing something else, I made sunset watching a dedicated activity. I would arrive at the beach about an hour before sunset, giving myself time to settle in, to let go of any thoughts about the day, to simply be present with what was about to unfold. As the sun moved closer to the horizon, the light would change minute by minute, each shift bringing new colors and moods. The water would transform from bright turquoise to deeper blue to shades of silver and gold. The clouds, if any were present, would catch fire with orange and pink light. Sometimes the entire western sky would become an artist's palette of impossible colors, while other evenings the sunset would be subtle and understated, all pale pastels and soft transitions. What struck me most was that no two sunsets were identical. Each evening brought its own unique display influenced by atmospheric conditions, cloud patterns, humidity levels, and factors I couldn't begin to understand. This variety meant that the experience never became routine or boring. Each sunset demanded attention and presence because it was genuinely a once-in-a-lifetime event that could never be exactly replicated. After the sun disappeared below the horizon, I learned to wait for what photographers call the blue hour, that magical time between sunset and full darkness when the sky takes on deep blue and purple tones. During this transitional period, the beach would become very quiet as most people departed, and the sound of the waves would seem amplified in the gathering darkness. This became my favorite time to walk along the water's edge, feeling the warm water wash over my feet, listening to the different sounds the waves made in darkness versus daylight. I discovered that the island's geography creates interesting microclimates and conditions. The western coast where I was staying is generally drier and sunnier than other parts of the island because the mountains block most of the rain clouds coming from the east. This meant I could count on gentle, calm evenings almost every day, perfect for rest and relaxation. The trade winds that blow almost constantly provided natural air conditioning, keeping the temperature comfortable even during the warmest parts of the day. The vegetation near my cottage added another layer to the sensory experience. Plumeria trees dropped their fragrant white and pink blossoms along the path to the beach, and I would often stop to pick one up and breathe in its impossibly sweet scent. Hibiscus flowers in reds and yellows and pinks bloomed everywhere, attracting tiny birds that I later learned were Japanese white-eyes. The rustling of palm fronds and the constant breeze created a sound like gentle rain, adding another element to the symphony of natural sounds surrounding me. I began to understand that my deepening ability to sleep peacefully wasn't just about the absence of stress or the pleasant environment. It was about the fullness of sensory experience during my waking hours. By spending entire days engaged with the natural world through all my senses, I was giving my mind and body the rich input they craved. This satisfied something fundamental, leaving me genuinely tired in a healthy way by evening rather than wired and exhausted as I'd been in my normal life. The rhythm of island life gradually reprogrammed my internal clock. Without the artificial stimulation of screens and schedules, my body remembered how to follow natural cycles. I began waking naturally just before sunrise without any alarm and feeling genuinely sleepy as darkness fell. This alignment with natural light-dark cycles created better quality sleep than any sleep aid or technique I'd tried before. I started paying attention to what I ate and how it affected my rest. The island provided abundant fresh tropical fruit, and I found myself eating more simply than I did at home. Papaya and pineapple for breakfast, fresh fish and simple salads for dinner, plenty of water throughout the day. This lighter, cleaner diet seemed to contribute to better sleep, leaving me feeling less heavy and more energized. One evening, I decided to try sleeping directly on the beach. I checked that it was permitted in the area where I was staying, then brought blankets and pillows down from the cottage just after sunset. I created a comfortable nest in the soft sand above the high tide line, positioned so I could see both the ocean and the stars. Lying there as darkness deepened, I experienced the ocean's presence in a completely new way. Without visual distractions, the sound of the waves became three-dimensional and all-encompassing. I could hear waves breaking at different distances, some far out on the reef, others closer to shore. I could distinguish the main crash of each wave from the subsequent rush of water up the sand and the long hiss as it retreated. I noticed smaller sounds too, the gurgle of water moving around rocks, the drip of water from wet sand, the occasional splash of a fish jumping in the darkness. The stars were extraordinary, more numerous than I could ever see through the light pollution of the city where I lived. The Milky Way stretched across the sky like a clouded river, and I could see satellites moving silently among the stars. Periodically, shooting stars would streak across my field of vision, and I found myself making wishes without really meaning to. Something I hadn't done since childhood. I fell asleep on the beach that night without deciding to, consciousness simply fading as I listened to the waves and watched the stars. I woke once in the very early morning, noticed the position of the moon had changed dramatically and fell immediately back to sleep. When I finally woke for the day, the sun was just beginning to rise, painting the eastern sky with light while stars still visible in the west gradually faded. That experience of sleeping on the beach became a regular practice for the remainder of my stay. There was something profoundly restful about sleeping so close to the ocean, about falling asleep and waking to the sound of waves, about having no walls between myself and the natural environment. I slept more deeply on those nights than I did even in the comfortable cottage bed, suggesting that some part of my being craved this direct connection with nature. I learned about the Hawaiian concept of pono, which roughly translates to righteousness or balance, but carries deeper meaning about living in harmony with the natural world and with others. My experience on Maui was teaching me about finding pono in my own life, about recognizing when I was out of balance and learning what I needed to restore equilibrium. The island's gentle but persistent lessons about slowing down, being present, and honoring natural rhythms were gradually changing how I thought about rest and restoration. During my second week on the island, I ventured to some of the more remote beaches, wanting to experience the full range of what Maui offered. I drove the winding road to Hana on the eastern coast, stopping at numerous beaches and waterfalls along the way. The eastern side of the island was dramatically different from the west coast where I'd been staying. Everything was greener and wilder with more rugged coastlines and powerful waves. While beautiful and energizing, I found the eastern coast too stimulating for the kind of deep rest I was seeking. The waves there crashed with tremendous force against black lava rocks, creating dramatic displays of spray and foam. The sound was thrilling but intense, more suited to adventure and exploration than peaceful sleep. This contrast helped me understand why I'd been drawn to the western coast, why my instincts had led me to the gentler beaches for my healing stay. One of the most profound experiences I had was swimming during what locals call the golden hour, that period shortly before sunset, when the light takes on a warm, golden quality. I waded into the calm water at Wailea Beach and floated on my back, looking up at the sky while gentle swells lifted and lowered me rhythmically. The water was warm and perfectly clear, and the setting sun painted everything with golden light. Floating there, held by the water, moved by the gentle waves, warmed by the sun, I felt something shift inside me. It was as though all the tension and anxiety I'd been carrying for years simply dissolved into the ocean. I found tears running down my face, not from sadness, but from a profound sense of relief and release. The ocean was holding me, quite literally, and I didn't need to hold myself together anymore. I could simply be, simply exist, simply float. This experience in the water became another evening practice. I would swim during golden hour, floating and allowing the water to hold me, practicing surrendering control and trusting in the ocean's buoyancy. This practice of surrender in the water seemed to carry over into my ability to surrender to sleep later in the evening. I was learning that rest requires letting go, requires trust, requires a willingness to stop controlling every moment. I met other travelers during my time on Maui, and many of them were seeking similar healing and restoration. A woman from Chicago told me she'd been dealing with insomnia for years and had tried every pharmaceutical and therapeutic intervention without lasting success. She'd been on the island for just 3 days and was already sleeping through the night. A man from London explained that he'd suffered a major health crisis and his doctor had literally prescribed a trip to Hawaii as part of his recovery plan. These conversations revealed that my experience wasn't unique or unusual. The island genuinely had healing properties, whether you attributed them to the physical environment, to spiritual energies, to the removal from daily stresses, or to some combination of all these factors. People came here broken or exhausted or overwhelmed, and they left restored, or at least beginning the process of restoration. I learned about the Hawaiian practice of Ho'oponopono, a reconciliation and forgiveness ritual that has deep roots in the culture. While I didn't participate in any formal ceremonies, I found myself naturally engaging in a personal version of this practice during my sunset observations. I would think about conflicts or resentments I'd been carrying and mentally release them into the ocean, visualizing the waves carrying them away. Whether this had any objective effect I couldn't say, but subjectively it felt powerful and cleansing. The constant presence of the ocean became a kind of metaphor for consciousness itself. The waves arising and falling, never stopping, but also never the same from moment to moment. My thoughts and worries and plans were like those waves, temporarily taking form, then dissolving back into the vast ocean of awareness. This perspective didn't make my concerns disappear, but it changed my relationship to them. creating space around them rather than being completely identified with them. I spent time learning about traditional Hawaiian navigation techniques, how ancient Polynesians sailed thousands of miles across open ocean, using only natural signs like star positions, wave patterns, and bird movements. The navigators could read the ocean in ways that seem almost supernatural to modern people, detecting subtle changes in swell direction that indicated distant land, recognizing which clouds formed over islands versus open water. This deep knowledge came from spending countless hours observing and learning from the ocean, developing an intimate relationship with it. This inspired me to become a more careful observer of the ocean myself. I started noticing patterns I'd previously overlooked. I learned to identify the different types of waves: wind waves versus ground swells, the difference between waves generated by local weather versus those that had traveled hundreds of miles. I noticed how the tide affected everything, how high tide brought waves closer to shore while low tide exposed reef and rocks that were normally submerged. I discovered small tide pools during low tide explorations, each one a miniature ecosystem filled with colorful fish, sea urchins, crabs, and other creatures. Watching these tide pool inhabitants go about their lives, completely adapted to their specific environment, reminded me that humans too are adapted to specific conditions. Perhaps my difficulty sleeping in my normal urban environment wasn't a personal failing, but rather a natural response to conditions that didn't suit my fundamental nature. The question became how to carry the lessons of Maui back to my regular life. I knew I couldn't recreate the exact conditions, couldn't have ocean waves outside my window or the perfect weather, or the removal from responsibilities. But perhaps I could incorporate some principles: the importance of natural light and darkness, the value of being present with sensory experience, the practice of letting go and surrendering control, the recognition that rest is not a luxury but a fundamental requirement. I started thinking about what created the conditions for my improved sleep on Maui. It wasn't just one factor, but a constellation of elements working together. The sound of the ocean provided consistent, peaceful audio input that masked other noises and created a sense of safety. The daily immersion in natural beauty satisfied something in my psyche that had been starving. The physical activity of swimming and walking tired my body in healthy ways. The simple diet and avoidance of alcohol and caffeine improved my sleep chemistry. The consistent sleep schedule aligned with natural light cycles regulated my circadian rhythm. But perhaps most importantly, I'd given myself permission to prioritize rest. I wasn't trying to squeeze sleep into a busy schedule or treat it as a necessary evil. I was honoring sleep as valuable and important, creating conditions that supported it, treating it with respect and attention. This shift in attitude might have been the most significant factor of all. As my departure date approached, I felt a mixture of gratitude and reluctance. I was grateful for this time of healing and restoration, for everything the island had taught me, for the profound rest I'd experienced. But I was reluctant to leave this place that had become a kind of sanctuary. I worried that the peace I'd found here would evaporate the moment I returned to my regular life. On my final evening, I returned to the beach where I'd watched my first sunset. Coming full circle, the sun was setting in spectacular fashion, with layers of clouds catching the light and reflecting it in shades of orange, pink, and purple. The waves were gentle, rolling onto the shore with that familiar rhythm I'd come to know so intimately. I sat on the sand and reflected on what had changed over these 2 weeks. I had changed, fundamentally and in ways that felt permanent. I'd broken the pattern of chronic tension and sleeplessness that had defined my life for years. I'd learned that my body and mind knew how to rest when given the right conditions. I'd experienced the truth that healing requires time and space and permission to simply be rather than constantly do. I'd discovered that the natural world offers medicine that no pharmacy can provide. The sound of the waves continued their eternal rhythm as darkness fell. I stayed on the beach long after the sun had set, long after the stars emerged, simply listening and breathing and being present. Tomorrow I would fly home, but tonight I was still here, still held by this island, still soothed by these waves. I committed to remembering this feeling, this peace, this sense of being exactly where I needed to be. I finally stood and walked back to the cottage, but I didn't sleep inside that night. Instead, I brought my blankets and pillows to the beach one final time and made my nest in the sand. As I lay down and closed my eyes, the familiar sound of the waves washing onto the shore filled my awareness. I synchronized my breath with the rhythm of the ocean, breathing in as waves swelled, breathing out as they broke and rushed up the sand. Sleep came easily, naturally, inevitably, as it had every night of my stay. I drifted off with the sound of the ocean in my ears, the warm breeze on my skin, the vast starry sky above me, and the soft sand beneath me. I slept deeply and peacefully, held by the island one last time, restored and renewed, and ready to carry this experience forward into whatever came next. The waves continued, their eternal rhythm through the night, each one arising and dissolving, never stopping, never identical, always present. In my dreams, I was floating in warm water under a golden sky, completely supported, completely safe, completely at peace. The ocean sang its ancient lullaby, the same song it had sung for millions of years to countless creatures seeking rest and restoration. As dawn approached and my body naturally began to wake, I remained in that state between sleeping and waking, aware of the waves but not fully conscious, comfortable and warm and deeply rested. Eventually my eyes opened to see the eastern sky beginning to lighten with the approaching sunrise. Another day was beginning, but for these final moments I remained still, listening to the waves, breathing with their rhythm, savoring the last hours of this healing time. The sun rose and painted the clouds with light, beginning the daily cycle once again. I finally stood, gathered my blankets, and walked back to the cottage to prepare for departure. But something essential had shifted. I was no longer the exhausted, sleep-deprived person who had arrived 2 weeks ago. I had been transformed by this place, by these waves, by the consistent practice of rest and presence and surrender to natural rhythms. As my plane lifted off from Maui later that day, I looked down at the coastline stretching below, at the white curve of beaches and the turquoise water and the dark green of tropical vegetation. I knew I would return someday, but I also knew I was taking something essential with me. The island had taught me how to rest, and that knowledge was mine to keep and practice wherever I went. The sound of the ocean waves continues in my memory, available whenever I need it. In times of stress or sleeplessness, I close my eyes and call up that rhythm, that gentle rushing sound of water meeting shore, that eternal pattern of arising and dissolving. I breathe in with the swell, breathe out with the crash, and feel myself settling into the same peaceful state I discovered on those Maui beaches. This is the gift the island gave me, the healing that occurred during those 2 weeks of gentle waves and tropical sunsets and deep, peaceful, restorative sleep under the stars. It's a gift I carry forward, a a practice I maintain, a connection I honor. The ocean waves continue their rhythm, and I continue to find rest and renewal in their ancient, eternal song. The memory of those waves became my anchor in the weeks and months following my return home. I found myself drawing on the experience in unexpected ways, discovering that what I'd learned on Maui extended far beyond simply improving my sleep. The island had taught me an entirely different way of being in the world, a way that honored rest and presence and natural rhythms over the constant striving and doing that had characterized my previous life. When I arrived back at my apartment in the city, the contrast was jarring. The sounds that greeted me were car horns and sirens and the rumble of traffic rather than gentle waves. The air smelled of exhaust and concrete rather than plumeria and salt water. My windows looked out onto other buildings rather than an endless ocean horizon. For the first few nights, I struggled to sleep, feeling as though I'd been transported to an alien world after spending time in paradise. But I was determined not to lose what I'd gained. I began implementing small changes designed to recreate some of the conditions that had supported such deep rest on Maui. I purchased a high-quality recording of ocean waves and played it softly in my bedroom each night. At first, it felt like a poor substitute for the real thing, but gradually I noticed it did help create a sense of acoustic space that blocked out city noises and provided the consistent, peaceful sound environment I'd grown accustomed to. I started paying much more attention to light in my living space. On Maui, I'd lived by natural light, waking with sunrise and winding down as darkness fell. In the city, artificial light was everywhere, disrupting natural rhythms. I installed blackout curtains in my bedroom and invested in lights that could be dimmed significantly in the evening. I made a practice of reducing light exposure for at least an hour before bed, allowing my body's natural melatonin production to kick in as it had on the island. I brought home small physical reminders of my time on Maui. A jar of sand from the beach where I'd spent so many evenings. A piece of smooth lava rock I'd found during a morning walk. Some dried plumeria blossoms pressed between the pages of a journal. These objects served as tangible connections to the place and experience. Things I could hold or look at when I needed to remember the peace I'd found there. I also brought back a practice that had emerged naturally during my stay. The evening ritual of watching the sunset. Obviously, I couldn't watch the sunset over the ocean from my urban apartment, but I could make a practice of marking the transition from day to evening with intentionality. I started going to a nearby park in the late afternoon, finding a quiet spot, and simply sitting for 20 or 30 minutes as the light changed and evening approached. This created a buffer between the activity of the day and the restfulness of night. The breathing practice I'd discovered while floating in the ocean became part of my daily routine. Several times a day, I would pause whatever I was doing and spend a few minutes breathing in rhythm with my memory of the waves. Inhale slowly and deeply. Exhale fully and completely, feeling my body relax with each breath. This simple practice proved remarkably effective at reducing stress and creating moments of peace even in the midst of busy days. I found myself thinking differently about time and productivity. On Maui, I'd learned that doing nothing was sometimes the most valuable thing I could do. That rest itself was productive in the sense that it restored my capacity for everything else. I started building more spaciousness into my schedule, saying no to commitments that would have left me overextended, prioritizing activities that nourished me rather than depleted me. My relationship with technology shifted significantly. On the island, I'd mostly avoided my phone and computer, and I'd noticed how much more present and peaceful I felt without constant digital stimulation. Back home, I couldn't completely disconnect, but I established boundaries. No screens for at least an hour before bed. No phone in the bedroom at night. Specific times for checking email rather than constant monitoring. These changes helped recreate some of the mental spaciousness I'd experienced on Maui. I also changed what I ate and when. The simple fresh diet I'd followed on the island had clearly contributed to better sleep and overall well-being. I started shopping at farmers markets for local, seasonal produce, eating more fish and less heavy meat, avoiding processed foods and excessive sugar. I noticed that when I ate lighter dinners earlier in the evening, I slept better, just as I had on the island. Perhaps most importantly, I changed my attitude towards sleep itself. Before Maui, I'd treated sleep as an inconvenience, something that took time away from all the things I wanted or needed to do. I'd worn my ability to function on minimal sleep as a badge of honor, proof of my dedication and toughness. The island had taught me how fundamentally wrong this perspective was. Sleep wasn't weakness or laziness or wasted time. It was essential maintenance, the foundation that supported everything else in life. Without adequate rest, I couldn't think clearly, couldn't regulate my emotions effectively, couldn't maintain my physical health, couldn't show up as my best self in any area of life. The island had given me permission to prioritize sleep, and I was determined to maintain that priority. I started tracking my sleep more carefully, not obsessively, but with genuine curiosity about what factors affected its quality. I noticed patterns I'd been too busy or distracted to recognize before. When I exercised during the day, I slept better at night. When I spent time outdoors, especially in natural settings, my sleep was deeper. When I engaged in creative activities that absorbed my attention fully, my mind was quieter at bedtime. When I connected meaningfully with friends or family, I felt more settled and content. Some nights were still difficult. Despite all my efforts and new practices, I occasionally experienced the insomnia that had plagued me before my trip. But now I had tools and perspectives I'd lacked before. Instead of panicking when I couldn't sleep, I would put on the ocean wave sounds and practice the breathing I'd learned while floating in the water. I would remember lying on the beach under the stars, feeling held and safe. I would trust that even if I didn't sleep perfectly, I was resting, and rest itself had value. I began recommending Maui to friends and acquaintances who mentioned struggling with stress or sleep or burnout. I would describe my experience, careful not to oversell it but genuine in my conviction that the island offered something healing and transformative. Some people followed my recommendation and reported back with their own stories of restoration and renewal. Others seemed interested but never made the trip, held back by the expense or the time commitment, or simply the difficulty of giving themselves permission to prioritize rest so completely. I understood that reluctance because I'd felt it too before finally deciding to go. We live in a culture that glorifies busyness and productivity, that treats rest as something to be earned only after everything else is done. Taking 2 weeks to do nothing but rest and heal felt almost transgressive, like breaking an unspoken rule about how life should be lived. But I'd learned that breaking that rule was exactly what I needed, and I wished others could give themselves the same permission. About 6 months after returning from Maui, I noticed that my improved sleep had created a cascade of other positive changes in my life. With better rest, I had more energy and clearer thinking during the day. With more energy and clearer thinking, I was more productive and creative in my work. With better work performance, I felt more confident and satisfied. With greater confidence and satisfaction, I engaged more fully with friends and family. Everything was connected, and it all flowed from the foundation of adequate rest. I also noticed I was less reactive to stress and difficulty. When challenges arose, as they inevitably did, I was able to respond more thoughtfully rather than simply reacting from a place of exhaustion and overwhelm. I had more emotional resilience, more capacity to deal with whatever life brought. This wasn't because problems had disappeared, but because I had the internal resources to handle them differently. During this time, I started planning my return to Maui. I knew I couldn't go immediately, but having a future trip to look forward to gave me something to anticipate, a promise to myself that I would return to that healing place. I began saving money specifically for this purpose, setting aside a small amount from each paycheck. I researched different areas of the island, wondering if I should return to the same location or explore somewhere new. I also started learning more about Hawaiian culture and history, wanting to understand the place that had given me so much more deeply. I read about the ancient Hawaiian concept of aloha, which is often translated simply as love, but actually encompasses a much broader sense of compassion, peace, and living in harmony with others and with the land. I learned about the importance of the ocean in Hawaiian spirituality and daily life, how it was seen not just as a resource, but as an ancestor, a living entity deserving of respect and care. This deeper understanding made me appreciate my Maui experience even more. I hadn't just gone to a beautiful place and happened to feel better. I'd connected with a location that had been recognized as healing for centuries, where the culture itself was built around principles of balance and harmony with nature. My personal healing was part of a much longer story of people finding restoration in that place. I started incorporating other elements of Hawaiian wisdom into my life. The concept of malama, which means to care for, preserve, and protect, became important to me. I thought about what I needed to malama in my own life. My health, my relationships, my creativity, my connection to nature. I also thought about malama in a broader sense, about my responsibility to care for the places and people and systems that sustained me. The practice of being pono, living in balance and righteousness, became a kind of daily check-in. Was I in balance with my needs and responsibilities? Was I treating others and myself with respect? Was I living in a way that honored my values? When I noticed I was out of balance, I would think about what needed to shift to restore pono, often finding that the answer involved some form of rest or simplification or letting go. I began sharing my story more openly, writing about my experience in a blog post that unexpectedly resonated with many people. I received emails from strangers telling me about their own struggles with sleep and stress, asking for advice about planning a similar healing journey. I tried to help where I could, sharing practical information about where to stay and what to do, but also emphasizing that the external details mattered less than the internal willingness to truly rest and be present. One person who contacted me was dealing with severe anxiety and depression following a personal tragedy. They asked if I really thought a trip to Maui could help with something so serious. I was careful in my response, emphasizing that I wasn't a therapist or doctor, and that serious mental health issues required professional support. But I also shared honestly that the island had helped me heal in ways I hadn't expected, that sometimes changing our environment completely can create space for healing that's difficult to access in our normal surroundings. They did end up going to Maui, staying for 3 weeks in a small rental near the ocean. Months later, they sent me a message saying the trip had been a turning point in their healing journey. It hadn't solved everything, they explained, and they were still working with a therapist and taking medication. But something had shifted during those weeks on the island. Some deep rest had occurred that made it possible to engage with their healing process in a new way. They described it as finally being able to stop running from their pain and just sit with it, held by the ocean in a gentle environment. This message reinforced my sense that what I'd experienced wasn't unique to me. The island really did have healing properties, whether you explain them scientifically through the benefits of nature exposure and stress reduction, or spiritually through concept of mana and sacred places, or simply through the practical effects of removing yourself from stressful environments and prioritizing rest. The mechanism mattered less than the reality that people arrived broken or exhausted and left more whole. As I approached the 1-year anniversary of my first trip to Maui, I decided it was time to return. I'd been back in my regular life for a year, implementing the practices I'd learned, maintaining the improvements in my sleep and overall well-being. But I could feel myself starting to drift back toward old patterns, feel the pull of busyness and productivity threatening to overwhelm my commitment to rest and balance. I needed to return to the source to reconnect with the place and experience that had transformed me. This time, I approached the trip with different intentions. My first visit had been about healing and learning to rest. This visit would be about deepening my practice, about exploring more of the island, about understanding even more fully what this place had to teach me. I planned to stay for 3 weeks, giving myself more time to settle in and really inhabit the island's rhythms. I rented a different cottage this time, farther north in the Kihei area, but still right on the beach with the ocean sounds filling the space. The moment I arrived and heard those waves again, something in me relaxed at a level I hadn't even realized was tense. It was like coming home, like returning to a place where I was known and welcomed. The ocean was still here, still offering its endless rhythm, still inviting me to rest and restore. The first few days of this second visit, I simply repeated the practices from my initial trip. Morning coffee on the Ambience beach watching the sunrise, long stretches of time simply being present with the ocean, afternoon swims during golden hour, sunset observations from the sand, sleeping with the windows open to the sound of waves. It all felt familiar and comforting, like putting on a favorite piece of clothing that fits perfectly. But I also wanted to explore new dimensions of the island and my relationship with it. I signed up for a traditional outrigger canoe experience, joining a small group paddling out beyond the surf line to deeper water. The guide explained that canoe voyaging was central to ancient Hawaiian culture, that the ability to read the ocean and navigate vast distances was a highly honored skill. As we paddled together, learning to coordinate our movements and work as a crew, I felt connected to this ancient practice in a way that moved me deeply. From the canoe, the ocean felt completely different than it did from the beach. We were out where the swells were largest, rising and falling with the motion of the water, seeing the island from the perspective of someone arriving by sea. The guide pointed out subtle variations in the wave patterns that indicated underwater features, showed us how to read the clouds and understand what they revealed about conditions ahead. I realized I'd been experiencing the ocean only from one perspective, and there was so much more to learn and understand. I also spent time exploring the upcountry region of Maui, the slopes of Haleakala volcano, where the landscape was completely different from the coastal areas. The air was cooler and thinner at higher elevation, and the vegetation changed from tropical palms and hibiscus to fragrant eucalyptus and rolling grasslands. I visited a lavender farm where the plants swayed in the constant breeze and the scent was intoxicating. I learned that this area had its own kind of peace, different from the ocean but equally restorative. One morning, I woke at 3 in the morning to drive to the summit of Haleakala to watch the sunrise. The drive up the mountain in darkness was surreal, switching back and forth on the winding road as altitude increased and temperature dropped. At the summit, I bundled in layers and joined other early risers waiting for the sun to appear above the clouds that blanketed the landscape below us. When the sun finally emerged, it was one of the most spectacular things I'd ever witnessed. We were literally above the clouds and the sun painted them from below with oranges and pinks and golds. The volcanic crater spread below us, a vast alien landscape of cinder and rock that looked like the surface of another planet. The air was thin and cold and so clear that stars were still visible even as the sky lightened. In that moment, standing on top of that ancient volcano watching the birth of a new day, I felt the full power and majesty of this island in a way I hadn't before. The experience reminded me that peace and healing come in many forms. The gentle ocean beaches offered one kind of restoration, soft and nurturing and deeply relaxing. But this mountain summit offered something different, something more about awe and perspective, and recognizing how small we are in the grand scheme of things. Both were valuable, both were needed, both were part of what made this island so special. I spent more time talking with local residents during this visit, asking them about their relationship with the island and what it meant to them. Many had moved here from elsewhere, drawn by the beauty and lifestyle, while others had deep family roots going back generations. Almost everyone mentioned the healing quality of the place, the sense that the island restored something essential that modern life tends to drain away. One woman I met, a teacher who had lived on Maui for 20 years after moving from New York, told me that the island had taught her the difference between clock time and island time. Clock time was rigid and linear, always pushing forward, measuring productivity and efficiency. Island time was more fluid and cyclical, following natural rhythms like tides and seasons, honoring the fact that some things can't be rushed. She'd learned to live more in island time even while fulfilling her responsibilities, and it had transformed her experience of life. This concept of island time resonated deeply with what I'd experienced. On Maui, I always knew generally what time it was because the sun's position and the light quality revealed it. But I rarely checked a clock. Time passed differently here, measured not in hours and minutes, but in tides and sunrises and the slow movement of shadows across the sand. This way of experiencing time felt more natural and less stressful, more connected to actual lived experience rather than arbitrary numerical divisions. I attended a traditional Hawaiian ceremony one evening, a blessing offered at a beach park as the sun set. The kahuna, or spiritual practitioner, chanted in Hawaiian while participants stood in a circle. Though I didn't understand the words, the intention was clear. Gratitude for the land and ocean, respect for ancestors and traditions, recognition of our place within the larger web of life. Standing there as the sun painted the sky with color and the waves washed gently onto the shore, I felt part of something much larger than myself. After the ceremony, the kahuna spoke about the Hawaiian concept of ohana, usually translated as family, but encompassing a broader sense of community and connection. In the Hawaiian worldview, he explained, we are all related, not just humans, but also the land, the ocean, the plants, the animals. Everything is part of one large family, and what affects one part affects all parts. This wasn't just metaphor, but a practical understanding of how ecosystems and communities actually function. This perspective shifted how I thought about my own life and relationships. Back home, I'd often felt isolated and separate, convinced I had to handle everything on my own. The Hawaiian concept of ohana suggested a different way, recognizing that we're all interconnected and that asking for help or offering support isn't weakness, but simply acknowledging reality. We need each other, and we need the natural world, and pretending otherwise only causes suffering. I also spent time learning about traditional Hawaiian approaches to health and healing. In ancient Hawaiian medicine, illness wasn't seen as just physical, but as involving emotional, mental, and spiritual dimensions as well. Healing required addressing all these aspects, not just treating symptoms, but understanding root causes and restoring balance to the whole person. The ocean, specifically, was considered highly healing, with different beaches and conditions appropriate for different ailments. This holistic approach made perfect sense based on my own experience. My sleep problems hadn't been just about sleep. They'd been symptoms of a larger imbalance in how I was living. The island had healed me not through any single intervention, but through creating conditions that addressed multiple dimensions of well-being simultaneously. The ocean's physical properties combined with the beauty that nourished my soul. The stress reduction that calmed my mind, and the connection to something larger that fed my spirit. During this second visit, I also explored some of Maui's less touristy areas, seeking out local beaches and spots that weren't featured in guidebooks. I found small coves and hidden stretches of sand where I could spend entire afternoons without seeing another person. These secret spots felt even more precious than the popular beaches, intimate spaces where I could connect with the ocean without any distraction or self-consciousness. One of these hidden beaches became my favorite place for meditation practice. I would sit on the sand with my back against a sun-warmed rock and simply breathe, watching the waves and letting thoughts arise and pass like the water itself. Sometimes I would sit for 20 minutes, sometimes for over an hour, losing track of time completely. In these meditation sessions, I experienced a quality of peace and stillness that seemed almost supernatural, as though the location itself supported and deepened my practice. I began to understand that places themselves hold certain energies or qualities, not in any mystical sense necessarily, but in the simple fact that environments affect us profoundly. We're not separate from our surroundings, we're constantly in relationship with them, influenced by everything from air quality and natural sounds to beauty and spaciousness. The Hawaiian concept of sense of place, of different locations having distinct characters and appropriate uses, wasn't primitive thinking, but sophisticated ecological wisdom. As my 3 weeks on Maui drew toward their close, I felt both grateful and sad. Grateful for this extended time of restoration and deepening connection, sad to be leaving once again. But this time felt different than my first departure. I wasn't leaving as someone who had stumbled upon healing and worried about losing it. I was leaving as someone who had established a genuine relationship with this place, someone who would return regularly, someone for whom Maui had become part of my identity and practice of living. On my final evening, I went to a beach I hadn't visited before, wanting to mark this ending with something new, rather than just repeating previous experiences. The beach was small and rocky, with powerful waves crashing against dark lava formations. It wasn't gentle or peaceful in the way I'd come to associate with Maui's healing shores, but it was magnificent.